eloquence or superior wisdom, as I proclaimed to you the testimony about God, for I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Christ and Him crucified. I came to you in weakness and fear with much trembling. My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not rest on men's wisdom, but on God's power. We do, however, speak a message of wisdom among the mature, but not the wisdom of this age or the rulers of this age who are coming to nothing. No, we speak of God's secret wisdom, wisdom that has been hidden, that God destined for our glory before time began. None of the rulers of this age understood it, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. However, as it is written, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no ear has conceived what God has prepared for those who love Him. But God has revealed it to us by His Spirit. And the Spirit searches all things, even the deep things of God. For who among men knows the thoughts of a man except the man's spirit within him? In the same way, no one knows the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God. And we have not received the Spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, that we may understand what God has freely given us. This is why we speak, not in words taught us by human wisdom, but in words taught by the Spirit, expressing spiritual truths and spiritual words. For the one without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to them. They cannot understand them, because they are spiritually discerned. But the spiritual make judgments about all things, but they themselves are not subject to anyone's judgment. For who has known the mind of the Lord that He may instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ. As far as the reading of God's holy and inspired word. I love this story, and I've used it more than once, and so I really make no apologies for it. But a fellow pastor talks about a baseball game he was at. It was the Dodgers versus the Yankees, World Series. And he says he was grateful he was going to go watch his beloved Dodgers take off the Yankees and show them a thing or two. As it was, it turned out differently. Dodgers never even got on base. He was bemoaning that fact all his life until one day he ran into a gentleman who was a virtual sports encyclopedia, and the man says, "You were at that game?" He's going, "Yeah, I was at that game." He says, "That's the only game in which Don Larson pitched the only perfect game in all of World Series history." See, the problem with this man is he had a keyhole vision. All he saw was, from his perspective, is that his beloved team had not even gotten a hit. What he didn't understand is in the history of sports, this was an incredible experience. It was the only perfect game, which means the pitcher retired every batter he faced. The only perfect game ever pitched in World Series play. The problem with keyholes is we see just a little bit, and then we go, and by the way, kids, a keyhole is, back in the old days, you had skeleton keys, you could look all the way through and see through the doorway. I know, I have to explain these things anymore. I keep forgetting what we don't know. But yeah, you used to be able to look through the key, the hole, and you could see a little shape, you could see into the room. But the problem with that is if you look into a little hole, and maybe today a more appropriate concept would be the little thing they put in a hotel door. You can look at it. Yeah? And people look like they got big eyes and big heads, you know. Everything's distorted. The problem is, when we just catch a glimpse of something, we want to make sense of everything. And it doesn't work. It distorts everything. And so what Paul's doing is coming back to that, trying to correct what had been distorted, trying to straighten things out. He's contrasting between false spirituality and maturity. He's trying to get us focusing on true spirituality and true maturity. And how he does that is brings us back to God's wisdom, which is the foolish wisdom of the cross. Because God's wisdom is seen in powerful weakness. You pick up an oxymoron there? powerful weakness. We usually equate power, and we contrast that with weakness. But what if there is a power inherent in weakness? What if there's something else there? And so what Paul is talking about is a lot of folks, depending on their oratorical style, because they taught oratory, they taught you how to use the right words, the right emotion. Watch a political speech sometime. Don't pay attention to the content. Watch it. Listen to the tone, the intonation, the gestures. That's oratory. They're trying to get you to do something. But Paul says, I came with content. The content of the gospel. I came in weakness and humility. At the heart of his preaching stood the weakness of God, the story of a crucified Messiah. His own weakness served as a further demonstration of that same message. But even more to demonstrate that the message was of divine, not human origin. Because see, when you're trying to sell a human product, you've got to use all the right words, you've got to have the right intonation, you've got to have the right background music, so that you can sell your product. But if you're bringing the gospel of Jesus Christ, you're bringing a story, you're bringing the truth that doesn't depend on mood. It depends on the power of God. And what Paul does is he says, look, I came in weakness, I came to know nothing. My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but the demonstration of the Spirit's power. He says, I came and showed you what God is at work. He came to demonstrate, because God uses the weak things of the world to confound the wise, not tailor-made. There was another gentleman talking about his experience. He was the evangelist for his denomination, or one of them. He said he knew an upcoming evangelist came to him one day, and they were talking, wanting to get the tips of the trade. And this young man says to him, well, what is it that people like these days? He said, I know they don't like hellfire and brimstone, and that psychology thing is kind of passing away. He said, I realized what he was looking for was the next gimmick that would ensure his success as an evangelist. He was depending on technique. And what Paul says, what we need to focus on, is the crucified Christ. So what Paul's rejecting is not preaching, but self-reliance. That I can do things. I learned this lesson the hard way. A long time ago. Galaxy far, far away, as I said. In the first church I served, I did kind of became the town parson. I did a lot of funerals for folks who I didn't know. And I'd gotten good at it. Long thing. Before the service, I was visiting with the pallbearers and I said, well, aren't you nervous? Nah, not a problem. Wouldn't you know it? In the middle of the obituary, I mispronounced the gentleman's name. Felt about that high. God said, you think you know what you're doing? Let me show you. When we start to think I've got it all together, I can do it myself, but we don't need God, we're in trouble. Yesterday afternoon, I stood up here to do a wedding. It never fails. I'm cool, calm, and relaxed back there. I step right here, and I'm going, my goodness, what am I doing? I have to represent God here and join these two people in marriage. When you stand before someone who's passed away, and you got to say, no, I got to represent God here. I got to see, bring God's word. If you ever get to that place where you're going, this is routine, I'm in trouble. If I ever stand up here and say, this is routine, I can do this, I've got my notes, I've got my fancy pile. This thing has all the answers on it, doesn't it? It's a tool. I'm a tool. We're the tools of God's grace and power in this world. And when we're weak, God is strong. The problem is we don't like to be weak. The problem is we want to power through everything. Took a solo hike this summer. I planned to cover about 28 miles in 5 days. I'm Superman. The second day, I got whipped. Somebody out there decided that the pine beetles were more important than my hike. They knocked down a bunch of trees in my path. I spent a better part of the day scrambling over trees, climbing over things. When Deb saw me, she saw my legs, she said, "What did you do? Get in a fight with a mountain lion?" Yeah, he won. But I couldn't continue because my strength was not sufficient. But when God said, "Run, you're not in control." And if we follow God's plan, we begin to realize we don't have control. We're not in control. Never have been, never will be. We can't. Jesus said, "Nobody worry, can add a single cubit to their height, or even a fraction of an inch, or length of days to our age." We can't. I can't control what's going to happen tomorrow. But we can depend on the God who has called us. He says, focus on the cross. Finally, preaching that focuses on the cross, I like this quote, will not be cheerful or comforting. Such preaching will take the full measure of our depravity and meditate deeply on the radical character of God's solution. No upbeat self-help message here. This kind of preaching may sound foreboding, but in an age when we are surrounded on all sides by sugar-coated public relations hype and superficial gladness, public relations hype, you ever heard that stuff? We have a new product for you. It's going to fix everything. Some of our preaching does the same thing. You got an ache, we got a solution. You need help, we have God. We want to be told the truth about our desperate situation. Indeed, only when the truth is told can the depth of God's grace be rightly grasped. So many years ago, I had a weakness in my arm. Chiropractor will help. Chiropractor didn't help. I finally got to see a guy who had a big title on his door, said neurosurgeon. I had no clue who he was. He points out some MRI things. And he points at one and says, "There's the problem." I said, "How do we fix it?" He said, "Surgery." I said, "What about pills?" He said, "Sure, 5 years from now you'll feel fine." I had no control. I had plans that summer. I had things I had to do. I had places I wanted to be. God said, "I got a different plan for you." That's where we're at. And if he hadn't pointed that out and said, "There's your problem, here's how we fix it," I wouldn't have known the depth of the problems I was facing. And then his parting words to me were really comforting as I was leaving Sioux Falls. Be careful on your drive home. You don't want to be in an accident. You'll be dead. Oh. But I had to know the depth before I could understand what I needed. I didn't need a pill. I didn't need a chiropractor. I needed a surgeon. I needed somebody with skill. When we understand where we are and who we are, the solution depends not on our strategizing, not on our intelligence and wisdom, but on the grace and purpose of God. And so what it does, it confronts our boasting. We think we have plans, we have dreams. God says, no, you don't. He presents to us the wisdom of Christ crucified, which, by the way, is totally countercultural. It turns everything culture values on its head and said, this is not what it means to be the righteousness of God. It turns everything upside down. And then he calls us to be the counterculture. Now, I've got an apology to make. I've led you through about 3 different strategic planning sessions. Do you know where strategic planning comes from? Corporate America. You know what strategic planning is? It says GM wants to be the biggest car manufacturer, whatever. You know, GM, Ford, take your pick. We're going to be the biggest and the best. And to do that, we have to do this, this, and this. And so then we say, we hire the right people, get the right development. Translation is, if we line up everything in line, get everybody to follow us, we will achieve this phenomenal goal. Okay? Do you ever look at those things and go, yep? Okay? Why is that? Because we all are called by God, created individually or uniquely. One man described his own personal experience with strategic planning in his congregation. I figured if I got everybody lined up, and the image he used was that of a billiard table, or pool table. Okay? If you're good at it, you can line those balls up, and with one shot, a guy can clear the table, because it's all physics. It's trajectory. How many of you want to be compared to a billiard ball? But I can predict your movements by putting them in the right place. What God says is, I've called you to be a people of God. And this gentleman compared the difference to his congregation. It wasn't a billiard table or a pool table. It was more like herding cats. Okay? But you know, I'm not a cat lover. But why cats? Because cats are independently minded. They do what they want. And as the people of God, we're not called to be lined up like billiard balls on a table. We're called to ask God, where are you calling me? What is my purpose? That's countercultural. That changes everything. And how do we find out what God has for us? Excuse me. Do we lock everybody up in a room and say, "Can you come up with a vision?" Do we send you off in the mountains for a 5-day hike? No. But we take each day, we take this book that God has given to us. I think that they said the average person has like 9 or 10 Bibles in their home. I broke the average a long time ago. But we realize how important this is, but how often do we take it and ask the question, to read it and say, God, what are you saying to me today? We usually go to it and say, I need guidance. And, you know, no. But here's the challenge. Here's the opportunity. Here's the wisdom of God in Christ. That if we take this book, if we take it each day, read a short passage. You don't have to read the Bible in a year. You don't have to go through a chapter or 29 verses. Pick a couple verses. Read it before you have breakfast or whatever. I don't care. Before you go to bed, I don't really much. I'm not going to tell you what to do, except to take this, open it up, and read it, and say, God, what are you saying to me? Take verse 9 here. It says, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has conceived what God has prepared for those who love Him. Think about that. If you put that verse in your, I think about kids and their phones today. Rocky, I going to get my phone number. I said, well, take out a piece of paper. Paper, why? They all took out their phones. Okay? If you're an old guy like me, you write it down. If you're a young guy, you write it in. Or a young person, you take your phone out. Put it someplace where it's going to remind you each day, or each through that day, and then ask the question when it comes up. What does that mean? What has God prepared for me? What has God got in store for me today? And then what happens as we do that day after day after day is we begin to be transformed into the person God has called us to be. Because we're being transformed by the Word of God, not conformed to the messages of the world around us. We're being transformed by the renewing of our minds, by the way of another verse, so that we can know what God's perfect will is for us. And perfect, by the way, doesn't mean that you're going to do everything right. Perfect means that you're going to achieve the goal that God has called you to. You know what? The microphone's in the wrong place in this suit. God teaches us each day as we spend time here. Like I say, it doesn't have to be 14 verses. Maybe it's just one. But as you meditate on that, as you put it on a piece of paper, you put it on your phone, you put it on your desk, you put it on your steering wheel, I don't care where, put it on your hammer. Someplace where you're going to see it on a regular basis throughout the day. God does things through that. He honors. He says, my word will not go out and return to me void. It will accomplish what I've set it out to do. And if we study, if we listen, if we hear God, He will create this countercultural group. And that's what I came to realize as I took this summer away. Is that God has been trying to build a community. A place where people are cared for, a place where people are loved. A place where sinners can come in, people who know they've messed up, and find grace. A place where we can display the foolish wisdom of God, the powerful weakness of Christ. But it's not going to happen by a strategic plan. It's not going to happen by my wisdom or my intelligence or yours. But it's going to come when, as the people of God, we sit down on a regular basis, day by day, saying, God, what are you saying to me? And then as we find 2 or 3 people we can meet with, I'm not talking about a small group, I'm talking about a couple of people. But you meet for coffee, meet someplace, and you say, what has God said to you? What is God saying to us? And what does that mean for